Welcome, listeners. Before we start, a quick warning. This story includes pregnancy related horror, coercion, and psychological unease. Please take care while listening. There are things in this world that don't need to hurt you to change you. They don't break down your door, they don't threaten, they don't ask. They simply rewrite the future using you as the ink. This is It Is Already Done Closed Loop Gestation by No Sleep Scribe. And now the record begins here. Prologue. Field Operations Log DAAA. Case ID Pendulum Child / City Event. Operative Moore, Melissa. Field. Clearance Black Umbra. Status Active Investigation. Location Redacted Municipal Plaza. Mother-daughter installation site. I was 3 blocks out when my phone vibrated. Not a call, not a message. A system alert. New case assignment. Maternal event cluster. 4. Unexplained pregnancies. No sexual contact reported. Paternity. None detected. Gestational age. Undetermined. Note: LMP-based dating is considered unreliable under suspected anomalous gestational acceleration. I stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk like someone had yanked a leash. I read it again, slower this time, as if the words would become less impossible if I gave them enough respect. 4 pregnancies, same city, no sexual contact, no assault indicators, 1 confirmed virgin, 1 celibate by choice, 2 between relationships with no opportunity window and no behavioral markers consistent with deception. I have worked arson scenes where the fire moved against the wind. I have stood inside a house where every clock ran forward except one. I have watched a man's grief turn into something that learned how to speak. But the body doing this to itself, quietly, cleanly, without permission, felt like a different category of wrong. Something intimate. That's something that didn't need violence to be a violation. I kept walking. The city was doing what cities do. Commuters moving in swarms, coffee cups steaming, a dog dragging its owner toward a tree it had already claimed. Traffic lights clicked from red to green. People crossed. People waited. People stared into their phones like prayer. Normal. That was always the first insult. The plaza opened up ahead of me like a cleared throat. The installation was new. I recognized it from the briefing photo, but photos never show scale correctly. In person, it was taller than life-size. 2 brushed metal female figures facing each other in close proximity. Too close to be strangers. Too far to be comforting each other. Their features were simplified, almost unfinished, and the longer I looked, the more my brain tried to supply details that weren't there. Mother, daughter, or me and me again. A shallow circular water feature ringed the base. The surface was still, a black mirror holding the figures upside down. At certain angles you couldn't tell where metal ended and reflection began. The installation made duplicates of itself without trying. That detail bothered me more than it should have. At waist height, a plaque sat on a low stone plinth, brushed steel, clean font, no artist statement, no donor name, no civic dedication, just one line. A mother gives life to the future. I read it once, then again because I have learned that certain phrases are not meant to be read, they are meant to be accepted. The sentence felt too smooth in my head, like it had been there longer than the metal. My brain tried to treat it like truth. The wind picked up. The water didn't move. A family passed behind me. Two parents, one toddler in a puffy coat. The child's mittened hand clamped around a stuffed rabbit by the ear. The mother tugged the father's sleeve and pointed towards the sculpture. The father lifted his phone. The toddler began to cry, a thin, sudden wail that cut through the plaza like a wire. Neither parent looked alarmed. They just did what parents do: shushed, soothed, adjusted, continued. I watched them move on, and I tried to imagine the same scene with my life swapped into it. I felt a hint of longing before I shut it down. I'm 34, single, no children, no partner waiting at home, no small shoes by the door, no sticky fingerprints on my refrigerator. My immaculate apartment is quiet in the way people envy until they've lived it long enough to realize quiet can be a sound. I keep the TV on for noise whenever I am at home. I tell myself I like it. Most days, I even believe it. My badge felt heavier than usual against my jacket. I approached the plinth and let my eyes drift over the installation the way you're trained to scan a room. Corners, exits, line of sight, human behavior. Nothing obvious, no distortion, no shimmer, no heat haze, no smell of ozone or rot or copper, no sensation of pressure behind the eyes. Just art, just water, just a sentence. I had already requested CCTV from the city's surveillance grid and the surrounding businesses. It was waiting in my queue, a neat stack of time-stamped files that would turn into a map if I stared long enough. I opened the first clip. The angle was from a camera mounted on a light pole, looking down into the plaza. The sculpture stood in the center, like a fixed point, like something the city had built around without realizing it. A young woman entered the frame from the east walkway. 16, according to the report. High school hoodie, backpack, hair pulled back like she didn't have time to care. She walked fast, the way teenagers do when they're trying to pretend they're not cold. She slowed when she reached the water feature. Not much, not dramatically, just enough. Her right hand lifted, automatic, unconscious, and pressed lightly to her lower abdomen. Not a caress, not a cradle, a check. Then her lips moved. 1 second, maybe less. I leaned closer to the screen, as if proximity would grant me audio the camera didn't have. Her mouth formed 4 words. I rewound, watched again. 4 words, each one precise. It is already done. I felt my stomach drop, as if the plaza had opened beneath me. I watched the rest of the clips. Clip 2, a woman frowns at the plaque like she's judging meaning. Clip 3, a woman is on a call, and she suddenly removes the phone from her ear and drops it to her waist. Then each one places her hand on her stomach and whispers, "It is already done." Clip 4, at night, a woman stares at the space between figures like it's occupied. Without touching her abdomen, she whispers, "It is already done." 4 women, 4 separate days, 4 separate lives. 1 gesture, 1 phrase. I paused the footage on the last woman's face. There was no fear on it, no panic, just resignation, like she had been informed of something she couldn't change. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a secure call. I answered without looking away from the screen. "Moore," I said. "Operative Moore?" the voice replied, flat and careful. "Lab confirmation is in." I already knew what they were going to say. My body knew. My skin knew. My brain just hadn't accepted the shape of it yet. Proceed, I said. Amniocentesis was performed on all 4 subjects. It was chosen because even though estimated gestational age per last menstrual period was 6 to 8 weeks, fetal metrics indicated 15 plus weeks. The results indicate no paternal genetic contribution. All 4 pregnancies are genetically identical to the mothers. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was shocked, because something inside me tried to interpret that sentence as hope before it realized it was horror. Genetically identical, not conceived, replicated. I stared at the sculpture on the paused screen, 2 figures facing each other, a person becoming herself again, mirrored by water that refused to ripple. I thought of the plaque. A mother gives life to the future. And then, uninvited, my mind supplied the rest of the sentence as if the installation had been waiting for me to arrive. A mother gives life to the future, even if she doesn't want to, even if she never asked, even if she never agreed. I ended the call and sat very quietly. In the reflection of my phone screen, my own face looked back at me. For a moment, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone else was looking through my eyes. That somewhere in the city, something had found a way to turn motherhood into a mechanism. And it had started small, because that's how these things always begin. They start with 4. They start with a whisper. They start with a truth spoken too soon. It is already done. The department didn't call it immaculate conception. That phrase belonged to religion, to myth, to comfort. The department called it parthenogenetic replication with anomalous initiation, and even that was a compromise, an attempt to wrap a procedural label around something that had no business existing inside a human body. Working hypothesis. The event is not reproduction. It is continuity without consent, a future that removes external variables. 4 confirmed cases, 1 city. I sat in the temporary field office with the blinds half drawn and the overhead lights buzzing like an insect trapped in glass. The room smelled faintly of toner and industrial cleaner. A borrowed municipal space, neutral walls, generic furniture, a wall calendar still flipped to last month because no one here cared what day it was unless it could be documented. My laptop screen held 4 files in a neat row. 4 women who, by every conventional metric, should not have been pregnant. And yet, I clicked into the first case again because the mind always tries to bargain with repetition. Subject A, female, 16, confirmed virgin, verified by medical exam and corroborated by social history, parental statements, and a level of teen indignation that would have been funny if it hadn't been so bleak. Gestational estimate, 7 weeks, 2 days. Initial presentation, nausea, fatigue, breast tenderness. Primary care response, are you sure? Secondary care response, are you sure? Tertiary care response, silence, then paperwork. The department had obtained the amniocentesis under the cover of rare developmental screening. The results were already in my inbox, stamped with enough encryption to make the city's IT department sweat. Genetic match, 99.999% maternal. Paternal contribution, none detected. I didn't like how clean the number was. Biology is messy. Even identical twins aren't identical in the ways that matter most. Cells mutate, proteins fold wrong, life improvises. This wasn't improvisation, this was a copy. I moved to the second file. Subject B, female, 29. Celibate by choice. Documented history of voluntary abstinence for over 3 years. Confirmed by therapist notes and personal communications that had been acquired under emergency clearance and reviewed with as much restraint as the department ever pretended to have. Gestational estimate, 6 weeks, 5 days. Presentation, missed period, abdominal cramping, mild spotting. Emergency room note, possible ectopic, patient denies intercourse. Patient appears anxious and evasive. Evasive, it was always that word, wasn't it? When the body contradicts the story becomes the suspect. Her genetic results matched the first. No paternal DNA, no foreign markers, no contamination. The fetus wasn't half her. It was her. I opened the third. Subject C, female, 31. Recently ended a long-term relationship. Denies casual sex. Denies reconciliation. Denies assault. Denies drugging. Denies anything that would make this make sense. The denial wasn't frantic. It was flat, exhausted, the kind of denial that comes after you've already been accused and found guilty in the eyes of everyone who matters. Her primary physician wrote, "Patient insists pregnancy is impossible. Patient appears distressed. Recommend psychiatric consult." I closed that tab before my hands could curl into fists. Then the fourth. Subject D, female, 27. Between relationships, lives alone, works nights, limited social contact, no recent partners, no casual encounters. Her intake nurse had typed, "Patient laughed when I told her, then cried, then asked if we could test again." All 4 women lived within the same 5-mile radius. All 4 had crossed Municipal Plaza within the same 10-day window. All 4 had stood in front of the new sculpture. All 4 had whispered words the cameras could not record, but their mouths had clearly shaped them enough for me to read. I stood and crossed to the window. Outside, the city moved in bright and different loops. People on lunch breaks, joggers with earbuds, a man in a reflective vest dragging a trash bin over cracked pavement, a child holding a balloon that bobbed against the wind like it was trying to escape. My secure phone buzzed on the desk. I didn't want to answer it. I did anyway. "Moore," I said. "Operative Moore," came the voice of Analyst Rourke from Central. He sounded like he always did. Calm, precise, emotionally sanded down to the minimum required for function. "We've completed a preliminary exposure map." "Send it." A pause. The faint click of keys. "Transmission initiated. You should have it now." My laptop chimed. A map filled the screen, the city rendered in soft grays with red dots marking the subject's movements. 4 paths, 4 lives. And then the convergence point, a bright, pulsing circle around Municipal Plaza, the sculpture, mother-daughter. I could see it in my head without looking. 2 brushed metal figures facing each other, elegant from a distance, subtly wrong up close. The water feature around the base that stayed still even when the wind moved through the plaza. the plaque with its single line of text that felt less like a dedication and more like an instruction. A mother gives life to the future. Any other overlaps? I asked. Rourke hesitated. That was rare. Operative Moore, there are overlaps, but none as consistent as the plaza. Define overlaps. All 4 subjects have a maternal line history of absent paternal involvement, raised primarily by mothers, grandmothers, aunts. Minimal paternal contact across at least 2 generations. I felt something cold move through my ribs. It wasn't surprise, it was recognition. Because the sculpture wasn't just a mirror, it was a thesis statement. A mother and daughter facing each other, and the space between them filled with inevitability. Selection criteria, I said quietly, as much to myself as to him. Yes, Rourke replied. That is the current working model. I stared at the map. Model Rev 1 working. Exposure, gaze plus proximity. Vector, location. Filter, maternal line isolation imprint. Confirmation, phrase plus gesture. Output, clonal gestation. The department loved models, loved clean arrows and flowcharts and boxes that made the impossible look manageable. But the footage didn't feel like a model. It felt like a decision. Have we pulled the artist? I asked. City records list the sculptor as Marin Klein, local, no prior flags. The installation was commissioned through a public arts initiative funded by a private donor. Name? Another pause. Donor listed as the Harrow Foundation. My mouth went dry. Not because the name meant something in my personal life. It didn't. Because the department's internal database had lit up when it heard it. The department doesn't flag foundations because they're evil. It flags them because they're useful. Useful means repeatable. I clicked into the foundation profile that had already populated on my screen, as if my laptop had been waiting. A bland philanthropic organization, maternal health grants, youth literacy, community infrastructure, a mission statement that could have been copied and pasted from any wealthy person trying to buy goodness in bulk. But there were 2 internal notes tagged beneath it. Prior association, anomalous community projects, low confidence. Recommended review, civic installations pattern. My notes populated a line I didn't type. It is already done. My pulse picked up. Rourke, I said, I want everything we have on the foundation. All public works, all installations, all grants tied to physical structures. Understood, he said. But Operative Moore, what? The subjects have been moved to secure observation. My stomach tightened. Where? Facility redacted. Standard maternal monitoring. Medical staff cleared. Security in place. And the sculpture? Silence. I waited. Finally, Rourke said, city officials refused removal. Public backlash risk. Media coverage. They're calling it the most important installation in the city in decades. His voice tightened in disgust. The mayor said, you can't call motherhood or art dangerous. Of course he did. Art always became sacred the moment someone suggests it might be dangerous, and motherhood is always sacred. Then we do it quietly, I said. We can't cordon off a plaza without explanation, he warned. We don't cordon, I replied. We watch, we record, we count. And if it happens again? I looked at the pulsing circle on the map, the bright center where 4 paths converged. I thought of 4 women touching their stomachs like they were checking for a bruise. I thought of their mouths forming the same phrase. It is already done. If it happens again, I said, we'll have our confirmation. And then? Rourke asked. I didn't answer right away because the truth was ugly. If it happened again, we wouldn't just have confirmation. We'd have escalation. We'd have proof that the anomaly wasn't a one-time event. It was a process, a function, a machine. I closed the map and stood. My badge felt heavier than it had in the plaza. I picked up my coat, my field kit, my gloves. Then I paused because I could already feel the shape of the next step pressing against the inside of my skull. I was going back to Municipal Plaza, not to look at the sculpture, not to read the plaque, to do what the department always did when something impossible set roots in a public place. Measure it, define it, contain it, and pretend that naming a thing made it less hungry. Before I left, I glanced once at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. For half a second, the angle of my face looked unfamiliar. Not wrong, just doubled, as if somewhere in the city the future had already been drafted, and my body was being evaluated for whether it belonged in it. Municipal Plaza looked different in the morning. At night, the water around the sculpture had been a sheet of black glass. The ground lights made the metal figures glow from below, turning them into something reverent and wrong, an altar disguised as civic pride. In daylight, it was just a park feature. Just commuters cutting through on their way to work. Just a man feeding pigeons despite the sign that asked him not to. Just a jogger weaving around strollers and benches. Just a teenager perched on the edge of the fountain, scrolling with both thumbs like the world was something she could control if she moved fast enough. Typical. I hated how much cover familiarity gave an anomaly. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in on foot. Department protocol discouraged arriving directly at a suspected anchor site in a marked vehicle, even under a municipal cover. Not because we feared being watched by the public, because we feared being watched by the thing. I kept my posture relaxed, my hands visible, my pace unhurried. I wore plain clothes, dark jeans, a neutral coat, no insignia. The only overt identifier was the laminated city access badge clipped inside my pocket, ready to flash if someone asked why I was here with equipment. No one asked. People rarely challenge a woman with a clipboard. The sculpture rose at the center of the plaza, like a thought someone couldn't let go of. Mother, daughter, 2 figures nearly identical, facing each other at close range. Brushed metal softened the morning light, making the contours seem gentle. The effect from a distance was comforting. Generational continuity, maternal tenderness, a civic tribute to endurance. Up close, the tenderness fell apart. The faces weren't unfinished in a stylistic way. They were unfinished like someone had stopped halfway through creating a person and decided that close enough was the same thing as complete. The mouths were too smooth. The eyes were shallow hollows that suggested expression without committing to it. The longer I looked, the more my brain tried to supply details. A trick of human pattern recognition. We fill in what we expect to see. That's how anomalies get away with being wrong. The water feature around the base was perfectly still. Not frozen, this wasn't winter. Not stagnant, there was a faint filtration hum beneath the plaza, a low mechanical throb, You could feel through the soles of your shoes if you stood still long enough. The surface simply refused to ripple. A breeze moved through the trees and lifted loose strands of hair against my cheek. The water didn't respond. I approached the plaque. Brushed steel, clean font, no flourish. A mother gives life to the future. It was a sentence designed to be unquestioned. It wasn't an invitation. It was a premise. I crouched beside the plinth and pulled out my field kit. Small devices, compact and unremarkable. Thermal sensor, EM reader, spectrometer. Nothing that would draw attention unless someone already knew what to look for. I took readings in slow arcs, sweeping the base of the sculpture, the stone, the waterline. The numbers came back ordinary. No heat spike, no electromagnetic anomaly, no radiation beyond city background. That was almost worse. The department liked anomalies that behaved like broken machines, measurable, predictable, responsive to containment fields and interference patterns. This didn't behave like a machine. It behaved like a decision. I stood and walked a slow circle around the installation. From the front, the figures read as mother-daughter. From the side, they read as a woman confronting herself. From behind, the illusion snapped completely, and the shape became something else. Two bodies oriented towards an empty space, as if something invisible stood between them and held their attention. I stopped. My throat tightened for no reason. I looked at the space between the statues. There was nothing there. Of course there was nothing there. And yet my eyes kept returning to it, drawn like a compass needle to a magnetic field. I forced myself to step back. In my peripheral vision, the water held a clean reflection of the figures, inverted and perfect. A copy, a duplication, a future made from what already exists. My phone buzzed. I stepped away from the fountain before answering. I didn't want to be close to the sculpture while I spoke, as if proximity would make my words part of it. Moore, I said. Operative Moore? Rourke replied. We've pulled additional footage. Anything new? Yes. We have one near miss. I froze. Define near miss. A fifth subject crossed the plaza during the exposure window. Same pause, same hand-to-abdomen gesture, same whisper. My skin prickled. And? We can't confirm non-initiation. Only no output yet. Not yet, I repeated. He continued. The hypothesis is that the gesture wasn't the trigger. It was the confirmation of established contact. There is still the possibility that the process can be rejected or halted without producing an output. What's different? I asked. The line crackled faintly as he shifted papers or tabs. She has 2 children already, he said, both with the same partner. Partners still present in household. Stable paternal involvement. I closed my eyes. Selection filter, maternal line echo, a closed loop. A system that had already accepted an external contributor didn't fit the anomaly's preferred pattern. The sculpture didn't want motherhood. It wanted self-sufficiency. It wanted a future that didn't require anyone else. Where is she now? I asked. Unaware, Rourke said. No medical visit, no report. She has no idea she was considered. I stared at the sculpture again. 2 figures facing each other. The city thought it was about love. The department knew better. This was about replication, about removing variables, about making the future from one source. Keep her under passive surveillance, I said. No contact, no intervention unless she presents symptoms. Understood. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. A laugh rang out behind me, bright, unbothered. I turned my head and saw a couple taking photos in front of the sculpture. The woman leaned into the man's side, smiling. He lifted his phone and adjusted the angle until the figures framed them in the background. The sculpture was a prop, a landmark, a backdrop for other people's lives. Neither of them touched their stomach. Neither of them whispered. They snapped the photo and moved on. I watched them go, and the irrational part of my mind whispered something I didn't like. It doesn't want them. The thought made me angry, which was stupid. The department didn't allow anger to be useful. Anger made you sloppy. Anger made you human. But the anger stuck anyway, because the anomaly had a preference, and preference implied intention. I forced myself back into procedure. I opened my notebook and wrote by hand, because there were still things I didn't trust digital systems to hold safely. Site survey, municipal plaza. Anchor object, mother-daughter, public art installation. Amplification factors, reflective water feature, high foot traffic, prolonged gaze behavior observed. Physical readings, baseline, no measurable EM thermal anomalies. Behavioral effects, compulsion to pause, abdominal touch, whispering. Audible content, unavailable via city CCTV. Lip read indicates consistent phrase. It is already done. Selection filter, maternal line isolation imprint, paternal absence patterns. Event output, clonal gestation, maternal genetic identity. I underlined the last line twice. Then I wrote the next question I hadn't wanted to ask until now. What is the future? Because the plaque didn't say a child. It didn't say a baby. It didn't say a daughter. It said the future. And the department had learned the hard way that when an anomaly used a word like that, it didn't mean what humans meant. A shadow moved across the water. Not a ripple, a shadow. I looked up sharply. A cloud passed in front of the sun. The reflection remained perfect. My pulse refused to slow down. I turned away from the sculpture and started walking the perimeter of the plaza, scanning for anything else that didn't belong. Maintenance access panels, fresh construction seams, new cameras, electrical junction boxes. That was how you found anchors sometimes, not the object itself, but the infrastructure that fed it. Halfway around, I saw a city maintenance worker kneeling beside a control box near the fountain. He wore a reflective vest and heavy gloves. His tools were laid out neatly on the pavement. He looked up as I approached, squinting against the light. "Morning," he said, friendly in the way people are when they assume you belong. "Morning," I replied, matching his tone. "Routine check?" "Yeah," he said. "Pump's been acting up. Keeps, He hesitated as if embarrassed to say it out loud. "Keeps running smooth, actually." I blinked. "Smooth?" He nodded towards the water feature. "You'd think with all the leaves and the coins and the kids messing with it, it'd clog. But it's been perfect since they installed the statue." Perfect. I looked back at the water, still, mirror flat, untouched by wind, debris, or time. "Who installed it?" I asked casually. The worker shrugged. "Some private crew, Harrow Construction, came in after hours. City supervised, but you know how it is. Fancy donor money, they do what they want." After hours, night installation, minimal oversight, of course. Did they mess with the pump? I glanced at the Harrow Construction sticker on the pump control box. Not that I saw, he said, but I wasn't here the whole time. They had a tent up, privacy screens. Privacy in a public plaza. I smiled faintly. Thanks, just curious. He went back to his tools. I kept walking, my mind already building a list. Private crew, after hours, privacy screens, a water feature that refused to behave like water, a sculpture that didn't read as anomalous under instruments, but did under the skin, a plaque that functioned like an instruction, and 4 women who had stood here touched their stomachs and whispered, "It is already done." The department's containment protocols ran through my head like a checklist. Isolate anchor object, limit public exposure, monitor for spread, identify secondary vectors, neutralize amplification features, prevent escalation. Simple on paper, impossible in a city that loved its art. I reached the east walkway where the first subject had entered frame on the footage. I stopped where she had stopped. I faced the sculpture. For a moment, I let myself do what the victims had done. I looked, not at the statues, at the space between them. My throat tightened again. A pressure built behind my eyes. Not pain, not dizziness, just the sensation of being evaluated, of being measured, as if something was reading me the way I read files. I forced my hands to remain at my sides. I did not touch my stomach. I did not whisper. I did not give the anomaly anything it could interpret as permission. And still, the thought slid into my mind with the ease of a well-worn groove. It is already done. I stepped back so fast my heel caught the edge of the walkway. My heart slammed once, hard enough to make my vision blur. I turned away from the sculpture and walked until the feeling faded. Then I stopped under the shade of a tree and took a breath that tasted like cold air and city dust. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure channel. "Rourke," I said as soon as he answered, "I need the installation team records, permits, contractor names, overnight security logs, anything tied to that sculpture." "Already in progress," he said. "But more." "What?" "There's been another hospital intake." My blood went cold. "5th subject?" "No," he said. "Different demographic. 42, married, 2 children." My mind raced. Selection filters shouldn't. "However," Rourke continued, "she has a documented history of single-parent upbringing, no paternal involvement, same maternal line pattern." I stared at the sculpture across the plaza, gleaming in the sun like something holy. The near miss wasn't a near miss. It was a delay, a preference expanding, a hunger learning to compromise. Rule update. Existing children does not equal immunity. Paternal stability may delay output, but not prevent consideration. "Gestational estimate?" I asked. "Unknown," he said. "She presented with abdominal pain and fainting. Preliminary ultrasound suggests rapid development." Rapid. That word hit harder than it should have, because it meant the anomaly wasn't content with quiet replication anymore. It meant the future was impatient. "Send me the address," I said. Rourke did. I tucked my phone away and walked out of Municipal Plaza without looking back. I didn't need to. I could feel the sculpture behind me anyway, like a presence at the edge of a room, like something that had watched 4 women whisper their surrender and had just started looking for the next one. The hospital was 12 minutes away. In that span, the city had time to pretend it was ordinary. Traffic flowed. A school bus stopped and hissed open its doors. A man jogged across the street with a coffee balanced in one hand and his phone in the other. Someone leaned on their horn too long, furious at nothing important. I drove through it all with my hands locked at 10 and 2, my eyes fixed ahead, my mind replaying one word until it lost meaning and became pure sensation. Rapid. Human gestation is a slow tyranny. It has rules, timelines, benchmarks. It takes months for the body to build a person. It takes time for the mother to adjust, to bond, to fear, to plan, to regret. An anomaly that accelerates gestation isn't just replicating, it's rushing. And when something in our line of work rushes, it's either panicking or it's confident. I parked in the employee lot under the cover of a municipal health inspection credential the department had forged so cleanly it would pass a federal audit. My field kit sat in the passenger seat like a quiet animal. I left it there. Walking into a hospital with equipment was a good way to attract questions I didn't have time to answer. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and warmed plastic. Fluorescent lights turned everyone's skin the same shade of tired. The waiting room was full of people pretending they weren't afraid, scrolling, chewing ice, staring at the television bolted to the wall. The department had a liaison on site already. They always moved faster than they admitted. A woman in navy scrubs approached me near the elevators. Her badge read K. Sanchez, Patient Advocate, which was almost funny. She didn't smile. Operative Moore? She asked softly. Yes. This way. She led me through a side corridor, away from the waiting room and the cameras and the casual human witnesses. The hall grew quieter, the doors more restricted. A security guard nodded once and looked away, as if he'd already been told what not to notice. We stopped outside a room with its blinds drawn. Sanchez lowered her voice. She's unstable, pain levels inconsistent with imaging. She's requesting a C-section. At what gestational age? I asked. Sanchez hesitated. That's the problem. She swiped her badge and opened the door. The patient lay on the bed with her knees drawn up, hands clenched in the sheet like she was trying to keep herself from floating away. Her hair was damp with sweat. She looked older than 42, in the way people do when their bodies betray them. Her eyes snapped to me the second I entered, not the unfocused gaze of a person in pain, focused, tracking, as if she'd been waiting. Are you with the department? She asked, then blinked like she hadn't intended the word. My throat tightened. No civilian says that word by accident. No one ever said department unless they'd already been touched by something that knew what we were. I didn't answer fast enough. I'm here to help, I said carefully. She laughed once, sharp and humorless, then immediately winced and pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. Not a cradle, a check, a reflex. Her lips moved before she spoke, like she was rehearsing something she couldn't stop herself from saying. It is already done, she whispered. The words landed in the room like a verdict. Sanchez's expression didn't change. Either she hadn't heard or she'd been trained not to react. I stepped closer to the bed. What's your name? Dana, she said. Dana Lyle. The file in my head updated itself automatically. 42, married, 2 children, maternal line parental absence, plaza exposure, selection criteria expanding. How long have you been in pain? I asked. Since last night, she said, but I've been wrong since Tuesday. Wrong how? Dana swallowed. Her eyes flicked towards the corner of the room like she expected someone to be standing there. I can feel it moving, she said. Not like a baby, Like, she shuddered, like a thought. I felt my stomach turn. What did the ultrasound show? I asked Sanchez without taking my eyes off Dana. Sanchez glanced at the chart. Fetal development inconsistent. Estimated between 16 and 24 weeks, depending on which metric you use. Heart rate stable. No detectable abnormalities. No detectable abnormalities, the department's favorite lie. Dana's breath hitched. They keep asking me when my last period was, she said. Like I'm stupid. Like I don't know my own body. Like I didn't. She cut herself off, jaw trembling. Like I didn't what? Like I didn't sleep with someone else? Like I didn't cheat? Like I didn't lie? The anomaly didn't need evidence. It only needed doubt. Did you go to Municipal Plaza? I asked. Dana's eyes widened. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I walk there sometimes. It's on my route to work. They put up that new statue. Did you stop? Her throat bobbed. She looked down at her stomach like it might answer for her. I don't remember stopping, she said. I remember looking. And then Dana's lips moved again, silent, 4 words. Then she spoke them aloud, like she couldn't keep them inside anymore. It is already done. The room went quiet. Even the machine seemed to pause, as if listening. I leaned in slightly. Dana, do you know why you said that? Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. No, she whispered, but it felt true. It felt like something told me. Sanchez shifted her weight, the smallest sign of discomfort, human reaction trying to surface through training. I didn't blame her. I'd been doing this for years, and it still made my skin crawl when a civilian spoke like a report, when a person's mouth became a transcript. I pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat. The department taught us not to sit at a patient's bedside unless necessary. It created a false sense of intimacy. It blurred lines. It made you feel like you were a person instead of a procedure. I sat anyway, because Dana Lyle wasn't just a case. She was a woman in pain, terrified, and being quietly destroyed by disbelief. Your husband, I said. Does he know you're here? Her face twisted. He's on his way. Does he know why you're here? Dana stared at the ceiling. Her voice was barely audible. I told him I fainted. You didn't tell him you're pregnant? A sob broke out of her like a cough. She covered her mouth with her hand, trying to swallow it. No, she said, because I can't. Because if I say it out loud... She stopped, breathing hard. If I say it out loud, she continues, it becomes real. It was already real. That was the point. The anomaly wanted reality to arrive in stages, slow enough for denial, fast enough for damage. Sanchez's phone buzzed. She checked it, then looked at me. Operative, she said quietly. The OB is requesting immediate consult. They're concerned about placental abruption. I stood. Take me to imaging. Dana's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than it should have been. Don't leave, she whispered. The plea wasn't just fear of being alone. It was fear of being alone with herself. I squeezed her hand once. I'm not leaving, I lied, because it was kinder than the truth. I'm right here. Her fingers loosened. I followed Sanchez into the hall and down to imaging. The ultrasound room was dim, the screen bright. The technician's face was too neutral. Neutral was what people wore when they'd seen something they couldn't process. A doctor stood near the monitor, arms crossed. He looked up as I entered, irritation already loaded in his posture. "Who are you?" he asked. "Municipal Health Oversight," I said, flashing the badge. He barely glanced at it. "We need surgical clearance," he said. "Now." "What are you seeing?" I asked. He gestured to the screen. "Look." The image was grainy and familiar and wrong in the way fetal images always are. A curled form, a skull, a spine, limbs shifting. Then the fetus turned. Not a random drift, a deliberate rotation. It oriented toward the probe with a smoothness that made the technician's hand tremble slightly. The heart rate didn't spike. It stayed perfectly even, like it wasn't startled by observation. And then it lifted one tiny hand. Not a flail, not a reflex. A movement that looked like intention. The hand pressed against the uterine wall, against the probe's pressure point, like it knew where it was being touched, like it was touching back. The doctor exhaled sharply. "That's not possible," he muttered. I stared at the screen. The fetus's face came into view for a fraction of a second, and my brain tried to reject it, because it wasn't a baby face. Not exactly. The features were too calm, too set, too familiar. I leaned closer. The technician swallowed. "It kept doing that," she whispered, "every time we scan." I didn't answer because my mind had already drawn the line I didn't want to draw. Genetically identical to the mother, a clone, a copy, and now accelerated development. The anomaly wasn't building a child. It was building a future, something that would arrive sooner than anyone could stop it. Sanchez's voice came behind me, quiet. "Operative Moore?" I forced myself to step back from the screen. "How long until surgery?" The doctor didn't hesitate. "Within the hour. She's unstable. We can't wait." Within the hour. My phone buzzed again. I already knew who it would be. I stepped into the hall and answered. "Moore." Rourke's voice came through, tighter than before. "Operative Moore, we have confirmation of another gestational acceleration event." "Where?" "Same city, different hospital. Subject is one of the original 4. My blood went cold. "Which one?" "Subject B, celibate by choice." I closed my eyes. This wasn't expanding. It was synchronizing. The anomaly wasn't satisfied with initiating replication. It was moving the pregnancies forward like pieces on a board. "Any complications?" I asked. "Yes," Rourke said. "She's reporting auditory phenomena. She says the fetus is speaking." I opened my eyes and stared down the corridor towards Dana's room. The city had unveiled a sculpture and called it a tribute. The department had found it and called it an anchor. But the women carrying the future didn't have words for it. They only had one phrase that kept arriving in their mouths like a stamped form. "It is already done." "Rourke," I said quietly, "I want that plaza closed." Silence. Then, "That will require municipal coordination." "I don't care," I said. "Use a gas leak. Use a water main break. Use whatever you have to. But if this is accelerating, we don't have time for public opinion." Another pause. "Understood," Rourke said. "Initiating containment request." I ended the call and leaned my forehead briefly against the cool hospital wall. I thought of Dana Lyle's grip on my wrist. "Don't leave." I thought of the fetus on the screen, turning toward the probe like it recognized scrutiny, like it recognized me. and for the first time since the case began, a thought rose up that didn't feel like mine. Not a whisper, not words, just a certainty that settled into my bones with terrifying calm. The future didn't need permission. It only needed time, and time was running out. Exposure, gaze plus proximity, plaza anchor, filter, maternal line isolation imprint, confirmation, phrase, gesture, output, clonal gestation plus accelerated development. Dana Lyle went into surgery 43 minutes later, not because the anomaly demanded it, because her body couldn't keep up with what was happening inside it. The operating wing smelled sharper than the rest of the hospital. Sterile air and heated plastic and something faintly metallic that always made me think of coins held too long in a fist. The lights were too bright, the corridors too clean, the silence too disciplined, a place designed to convince you that control was possible. Sanchez walked beside me in scrubs she'd pulled from a locked cabinet, her hair tucked into a cap, her expression professional enough to pass at a glance. "Are you coming in?" she asked. "No," I said, "I'm not cleared." "You're the only one who knows what this is," she replied. "That doesn't make me a surgeon." "It makes you a witness." I didn't have a response to that. The department trained us to avoid being witnesses whenever possible. Witnesses became evidence. Evidence became obligation. I stopped at the observation window outside OR3 and watched through the glass as Dana was wheeled in. She looked smaller on the table, swallowed by the blue drapes and the machinery. Her eyes were open, frantic above the oxygen mask. She turned her head slightly, as if she could sense me beyond the barrier. Her gaze found the window, found me. Even through glass and distance, I saw her lips move. "It is already done." Then the anesthesiologist spoke. Her eyelids fluttered, and she went under. The room shifted into choreography, gloved hands, instruments, clipped voices calling out numbers and steps. The OB surgeon leaned in, steady and calm, the kind of calm you learned or you broke. I stood still. I didn't blink. I didn't look away, because the first rule of our work was simple. If you can't stop it, record it. A nurse entered the hallway and paused when she saw me. She looked at my badge, then away, as if she'd decided she didn't want to know what it meant. "Her husband is here," she said quietly. "He's asking questions." He wanted answers. The hospital wanted signatures. The department wanted silence. "Where?" Sanchez asked. "Family room." Sanchez looked at me. I knew what she wanted. I also knew what I couldn't do. If I went into that room, I would become a person instead of a procedure. I would have to answer a man who didn't deserve this with words that couldn't fix it. And I would fail. "Tell him the surgeon will update him," I said. The nurse nodded and left. Sanchez didn't move. "You don't like being seen," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. "No," I admitted. "I don't." "Why?" "Because if someone saw me clearly enough, they might ask why I was alone, why I never went home to anyone, why I'd chosen a life where the only thing waiting for me was a locked door and silence and the echo of other people's disasters. Because if someone saw me clearly enough, they might notice that the sculpture's plaque wasn't the only thing in the city that believed motherhood was inevitable. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, because being seen makes you part of it." Sanchez's eyes flicked to the observation window. Inside, the surgeon made the first incision. The monitor beeped steadily. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the beeping changed. A slight hitch, a recalibration. The anesthesiologist's voice sharpened. Heart rate drop. The surgeon didn't look up. Pressure. Hands move. Tools passed. Suction. Dana's body reacted like a system under strain, trying to compensate for something it wasn't built to carry. Then a sound came through the glass. Not from Dana, from inside her. A wet, sudden pressure release that made every person in the room pause for half a beat. The surgeon stiffened. "What was that?" someone asked. No one answered. The surgeon's hands moved fast, 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 less controlled. "Amniotic fluid," a nurse said, voice tight. "There's more than expected." More than expected. Of course there was. The anomaly didn't care about expected. The surgeon reached deeper, pulled, and the room changed. Even through the glass I felt it, an invisible shift in the air, like the pressure in the building had altered by a fraction, and my ears were trying to equalize. The nurse's voice rose. "Jesus!" The surgeon's tone snapped. "Stay professional." A moment later, something emerged from behind the drape. A small, slick body, held up with practiced hands. For a second, it almost looked like any birth, except for the skin. Smooth, no vernix, too finished, like a baby who'd already practiced being a baby, like it had rehearsed in someone else's body. And the too short, too clean umbilical cord attached to the too uniform placenta. Then it moved. Not the twitching, startled movements of a newborn, not the helpless reflexes of a body meeting air for the first time. It moved with a slow, deliberate tension, as if it already knew what limbs were, as if it had been waiting. The surgeon held it higher. A nurse reached for the suction bulb. The infant turned its head and opened its eyes. That wasn't supposed to happen that quickly. Newborns blink, they squint, they stare unfocused. This one looked, focused, direct. The surgeon froze, the nurse froze, the entire room froze, because the infant's gaze locked onto the surgeon's face like it recognized her, like it was seeing something it expected. Then its mouth opened, and it made a sound. Not a cry, not the ragged, desperate wail of a baby demanding breath. A single, soft exhale that sounded too much like a sigh. Relief, completion. And then quietly, impossibly, through the glass and the masks and the sterile choreography, I saw its lips move. 4 words perfectly shaped. "It is already done." "That's not a reflex," the surgeon said. "That's response." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. Sanchez's hand went to her mouth. Inside the OR, the nurse holding the infant flinched like she'd been burned. Rule update. Output entity retains confirmation imprint. Anchor. Optional after imprint established. The plaza wasn't the source. It was the first place the rule took hold. The surgeon's voice cut through the shop. "Apgar, now, move." They snapped back into procedure, because humans are good at pretending that action is the same thing as control. The infant was placed on the warmer. The pediatric team moved in. Vitals, suction, oxygen. And still, it didn't cry. It watched. I couldn't see its face clearly anymore, but I could see the stillness of it, the wrong calm, the absence of panic, like it had been born with certainty, like it had arrived with approval already stamped into its bones. I stepped back from the glass. My hands were shaking. I curled them into fists and forced them to stop. Sanchez stared at the window, pale. "That's not," she whispered. No, I said, it isn't. Inside, Dana's monitor beeped erratically. The surgeon's voice sharpened. Hemorrhage. Clamp. Now. Blood loss. Complication. Emergency. Dana's body paying the cost of acceleration. The future arriving early always demanded a price. I turned away from the window before I could watch her die. I couldn't afford that kind of witnessing. My phone buzzed. Secure channel. I answered without looking at the screen. Moore, I said. Rourke's voice was strained. Operative Moore, plaza containment failed. My blood went cold. Explain. Municipal refused closure. Too much public pushback. Too many cameras. The mayor's office. I don't care about the mayor, I snapped. I know, Rourke said quiet. But we have an alternative. We've deployed a passive disruption team. What does that mean? It means we're contaminating the reflection. I blinked. Say again? The water feature is an amplifier. We're introducing surface agitation agents, dye, micro bubblers, anything to break mirror integrity without obvious sabotage. A procedural solution, a physical interference. It should have made me feel better. It didn't. Breaking the mirror didn't break the idea. It only made the city feel safer. Because the anomaly wasn't just using the water. It was using the idea. Mother and daughter. Self and self. Future made from one source. You couldn't break that with bubbles. Rourke, I said. The infant spoke. Silence on the line. Then, very carefully, repeat. It mouthed the phrase, I corrected, because I couldn't let myself say spoke again. Clear lip formation. 4 words. What words? I stared at the observation window again, at the blur of motion inside the OR as the team fought to keep Dana alive. I thought of the whispering women in front of the sculpture like it was a confession they didn't remember making. I thought of the fetus turning toward the probe. I thought of the infant's calm gaze. It is already done, I said. Rourke didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had changed. Less analyst, more human. Operative Moore, he said quietly, that phrase might not be a symptom. What is it then? A confirmation. A receipt. A stamped approval. The anomaly wasn't causing pregnancy and then leaving. It was conducting a process. And the whisper was the mother's body acknowledging completion, or worse, acknowledging compliance. My throat tightened. What about the original 4? I asked. Rourke exhaled. Subject A is under observation. Subject C is stable. Subject D is missing. My heart slammed once, hard. Missing how? Left her residence. Phone off. No credit activity. Last known location. I already knew. Municipal Plaza. The sculpture. The anchor. Of course. The anomaly wasn't just accelerating. It was calling them back. I ended the call without saying goodbye and turned toward Sanchez. She was still staring at the window, her face slack with shock. Sanchez, I said sharply. She blinked at me. I need you to stay here, I said. If Dana survives, she needs someone human, not the department. Someone who can tell her she isn't crazy. Sanchez swallowed. And you? I'm going back to the plaza. Her eyes widened. Now? Yes. That thing, she started. I know, I said. I saw it. The infant, the future. Already done. I left the hospital before my nerves could talk me out of it. Outside, the air felt too cold, too clean, like the city was pretending nothing had happened inside its walls. I drove back toward Municipal Plaza with the radio off, the windows up. The world narrowed to street signs and red lights and the pounding rhythm of my own pulse. When I reached the plaza, I didn't park 2 blocks away. I didn't approach slowly. I pulled up to the curb and got out. People were everywhere. Lunch crowd, tourists, teens taking pictures. The sculpture stood at the center like a landmark, innocent and gleaming. The water feature shimmered faintly now, tiny bubbles rising, a subtle disturbance, the disruption team's work. The reflection wasn't perfect anymore. The duplicates in the water were broken into fragments. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt the opposite, because the anomaly didn't need a perfect mirror. It had already learned how to make one. It had 4 women. It had at least 1 infant. It had a process. And somewhere in this crowd, one of the original subjects was missing. I pushed through people until I reached the edge of the fountain. My eyes locked onto the space between the 2 figures. It looked empty. It looked harmless. It looked like art. And then I saw her, Subject D, standing in the gap between mother and daughter, between self and self. Her posture was calm, too calm. Her right hand rested on her stomach like it belonged there. Her fingers on her left hand stroked a cross necklace like she was trying to rub the pattern off, and her lips moved as if she were speaking to someone who stood just inches from her face. I didn't need audio. I knew the words. It is already done. Then she smiled and stepped forward, not away from the sculpture, but into it, into the space between the 2 figures, into the future the city had commissioned and the department had failed to contain. For a split second, her outline shimmered, not like light distortion, like a copy being finalized. Then she was gone. No flash, no sound, no scream, just absence, like she had never existed. The man who was closest to the sculpture frowned, like he'd misplaced a thought. The crowd didn't react. No one noticed. People walked past the empty space like it was nothing, like the plaza had always been missing one person. When I rewound the live feed later, the gap stayed empty the entire time. Her file is missing the photo. Her name still exists, but the date of birth is blank. Her address field populated as NA. I stood frozen at the fountain's edge, my skin crawling, my mind trying to force reality into a shape it could hold. And behind my ribs, in the place where fear becomes certainty, the thought arrived again, smooth, calm, absolute. Not my voice, not my words, but it settled into me anyway, like a stamped form slid across a counter. It is already done. Vector confirmed, mimetic, water equals amplifier only. I didn't report Subject D's disappearance immediately, not because I didn't want to, because my body refused to move for 3 full seconds. And in this line of work, 3 seconds can be the difference between containment and contagion. The crowd flowed around the fountain like water around a stone. A couple laughed as they passed behind me. Someone bumped my shoulder and muttered a distracted apology. A child pointed at the sculpture and asked her mother what it meant. Her mother smiled and said, "It means love." The child accepted that and skipped away. I stared at the space between the 2 figures. Empty. No scorch marks, no distortion, no residue, no scent, no shimmer left behind. Subject D had stepped forward and vanished with the clean finality of a door closing, and the city hadn't even blinked. I forced my hands to unclench and lifted my phone with fingers that felt slightly numb. The secure channel icon glowed on the screen like a pulse. I called Rourke. He answered on the first ring. Operative Moore? Subject D is at the plaza, I said. My voice sounded too calm, like it belonged to someone who hadn't just watched a person become a missing file. Confirm visual, he replied automatically. I confirmed, she said. She entered the gap between the statues. A pause, a sharp intake of breath that he didn't quite manage to hide. And she disappeared, I said. Silence, then quieter. Define disappeared. Not left, I snapped, anger cutting through the numbness. Not ran, not hid, not abducted. She stepped into the space between them and ceased to exist in the plaza. Rourke didn't respond immediately. I could hear him typing. Any visible disruption, he asked. No, I said. It was clean. Clean, that word again. This anomaly was obsessed with cleanliness, with processes that left no mess for humans to trace. Rourke's voice tightened. Operative Moore, you need to withdraw. Not yet. Moore? Not yet, I repeated. If it can take someone that easily, it can take someone else. It can take anyone. Selection criteria still appears consistent, he said. Selection criteria expanded, I corrected. Dana Lyle didn't fit your original profile. She already had children. She had the maternal line imprint, he said. And now subject D is gone. Where did it put her? Rourke's pause was longer this time. We don't have an answer, he admitted. I stared at the sculpture again. From this angle, it didn't look like mother and daughter. It looked like two guards flanking an entryway. Then we get one, I said. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket before he could argue again. The plaza felt louder now, but not in volume, in attention, like every sound had sharpened, like the city had turned its face toward the sculpture without realizing it. I walked a slow circle around the fountain, scanning the crowd for anything else that didn't fit, anyone pausing too long, anyone touching their stomach, anyone whispering. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw a woman in a gray coat stop at the edge of the water, mid-30s, hair pinned back. She held a paper bag of groceries against a hip, her gaze fixed on the plaque. Her mouth moved, not for words, to a question. Her brow furrowed. Then her hand drifted down toward her abdomen. I moved before I could think. I crossed the plaza fast, weaving through people, closing the distance. By the time I reached her, her fingers had already brushed the fabric of her coat over her stomach. Not a full palm press, just contact, like a key turning in a lock. Her lips formed the words with eerie precision. It is already done. My pulse spiked. I grabbed her wrist gently but firmly and pulled her hand away. She flinched, eyes snapping to mine, startled as if waking from a dream. What? She started. Sorry, I said quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I thought you were someone else. Her gaze flicked behind me toward the sculpture again, as if she couldn't help it. No, she murmured, confused. I was just... She trailed off, just looking, just reading, just letting the city's newest landmark rewrite her body. I released her wrist. She rubbed it, not angry, just unsettled. Are you okay? I asked, because it was the closest I could get to asking, did it touch you? She blinked hard. Yeah, she said. I just got dizzy for a second. Then she laughed, embarrassed. Probably didn't eat enough. She walked away without another glance at the sculpture. The crowd swallowed her. I stood there, my skin crawling. The anomaly didn't need long exposure anymore. It didn't need the water to be perfectly still. It didn't need the subject to linger. It needed a moment, a glance, a whisper, a completed action. I looked down at the woman's wrist where my fingers had been. My grip had been human, a hand on skin, a physical interruption. It had broken something, at least temporarily. That mattered. It meant the process could be disrupted, but it also meant something else. I had interfered with the anomaly's preferred pattern, and anomalies notice when you interrupt them. I felt it then, an awareness, like a pressure change behind my eyes. Not pain, not dizziness, attention. I turned slowly toward the sculpture. The plaza noise faded in my perception, not because it quieted, but because my brain stopped prioritizing it. My eyes locked on the space between the two figures. The gap looked empty, but it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like standing in front of a closed elevator door and knowing someone is inside, listening. My throat tightened. A thought arrived, not in my voice, not in words I chose, a calm certainty. You saw it. I froze. The thought continued, not as a sentence, but as an impression pressed into my mind like a stamp. Now you understand. My fingers went numb. I forced myself to breathe. The department trained us for cognitive intrusion. We had protocols, grounding exercises, recitation anchors, personal facts to repeat until the mind reasserted its own shape. Name, age, rank, location. I whispered under my breath, Melissa Moore, 34, Operative, Municipal Plaza. The thought receded slightly. Then another impression arrived, sharper. A mother gives life to the future. My eyes flicked to the plaque. The words were unchanged, but they no longer felt like a dedication. They felt like a rule, like a law the city had installed and the anomaly was enforcing. I backed away from the fountain. My heel hit the curb of the walkway. I steadied myself and turned, scanning for the nearest disruption team member. They'd be in plain clothes, pretending to be tourists or maintenance staff, somewhere close enough to monitor the water agitation. I spotted a man leaning against a trash bin, sunglasses on, phone in hand. His posture was too still, his gaze too fixed. DAAA. I walked toward him. He didn't look up until I was within arm's reach. More, he said quietly. Did you see her? I asked. Subject D, he replied, yes. And you didn't stop it? His jaw tightened. Orders were observation only. We weren't cleared for public engagement. Public engagement, the phrase made my teeth ache. I just stopped a potential fifth, I said. He blinked. How? By touching her, I said, breaking the gesture. His expression flickered with something like fear. Operative, he said carefully, you should not be making physical contact with exposed civilians. I know, I snapped, but it worked. Or it transferred, he said. We've seen redirection in mimetic clusters before. Contact interrupts the loop. Loops seek closure. The words hit like cold water. I went still. Say that again, I said quieter. He hesitated. If this is identity predation replication through recognition, physical interruption might not stop the process. It might redirect it. I stared past him at the sculptures, two figures facing each other, a woman becoming herself, a future made from one source. If the anomaly couldn't complete its loop through that stranger, could it use me instead? My stomach turned. I pressed a hand to my own abdomen before I could stop myself. The contact felt like betrayal. My breath caught. For one horrifying second, the thought rose up with effortless certainty. It is already done. I jerked my hand away like I'd touched a hot surface. The agent's eyes widened. More? I'm fine, I lied. I wasn't. My skin felt too tight, my heartbeat too loud, the plaza too bright. I needed distance. I needed a controlled environment. I needed to get away from the sculpture before my mind became another surface it could reflect itself off of. I turned and walked fast, forcing myself not to run. Running would draw attention. Running would make me look like prey. I reached my car and got in, hands shaking as I started the engine. I didn't drive back to the field office. I drove to the observation facility where the original subjects were being held. Because if subject D could be taken, the others could follow. And if the anomaly had started to notice me, then the safest place for everyone was not the city. It was the department. The building rose out of the trees like a concrete apology. No windows at ground level, reinforced doors, cameras that didn't pretend to be discreet. A place designed to keep things in or out, depending on the day. I parked, swiped through security, and stepped into the cold fluorescent hallways. A nurse met me at the checkpoint. Not Sanchez, this was department staff. Blank expression, efficient. Operative Moore, she said. Subject B is requesting you. My stomach tightened. Why? I asked. The nurse's eyes flicked away. She says you'll understand. Of course she did, because the anomaly didn't just replicate bodies, it replicated certainty. I followed the nurse down the corridor to the observation room. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Subject B sat on the bed, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her face was pale. She looked too small in the hospital gown. She looked up as I entered and smiled, not happy, not relieved, resigned, like she'd been waiting for me to catch up. You saw it, she said. I stopped cold. What did you say? I asked. She tilted her head slightly, listening to something that wasn't there. The future, she whispered. It's so close now. My throat tightened. Tell me what's happening. Her hand slid to her stomach, slow and deliberate. This time it wasn't unconscious. It was intentional, a ritual. I stepped forward. Don't. She pressed her palm flat. And I heard her voice, although her lips remained closed in a small, sinister smile. It is already done. The lights flickered once, just once. Then the room temperature dropped by a fraction, enough to raise goose flesh on my arms. Subject B's eyes locked onto mine. Operative Moore, she said softly, I think it wants you to watch. And behind my ribs, the calm certainty returned, like a stamp on a form I hadn't agreed to sign. It is already done. Subject B's smile didn't belong on a human face, not because it was wide or cruel, because it was complete. Like something inside her had reached the end of a process and was satisfied with the output. I stood in the doorway with my hand half raised, caught between instinct and protocol. The department trained us to intervene early, to interrupt escalation to treat every anomaly like a fire you could smother if you moved fast enough. But this wasn't a fire, this was a printer, and Subject B was sitting there like a finished document. The air in the room felt thin, not cold exactly, just drained, as if oxygen had been replaced with expectation. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a fraction lower, the sound slipping towards something almost like a voice if you let your mind lean into it. I didn't. I forced myself to stay rigid, stay myself. Remove your hand, I said, keeping my voice level. Subject B blinked slowly, like I'd spoken from far away. Her palm stayed on her abdomen. Her eyes flicked to the corner of the room, then back to me. It doesn't hurt anymore, she said. That statement should have been relief. It sounded like a warning. I stepped closer, stopping just inside the threshold. The nurse behind me shifted, uncertain. Department staff were trained for violence, for panic, for containment breaches, not for a woman sitting calmly in a hospital gown with her hand on her stomach like she was listening for a heartbeat. Not for the way she said, almost tenderly, "It's moving so fast." "Where is Subject D?" I asked. Her smile deepened slightly, as if I'd asked a question she'd been hoping I'd ask. "She went ahead," she whispered. "Ahead where?" Subject B's gaze softened, almost pitying. "Into the future," she said, like it was obvious. My skin crawled. I tried again. Where did the sculpture take her? "The sculpture didn't take her," Subject B replied. "The sculpture showed her." Showed her, like a mirror, like an instruction, like a promise. I felt my pulse throb in my throat. "Listen to me," I said, careful, slow, using the tone we were trained to use when we needed a civilian to hold on to reality. "You are experiencing a cognitive intrusion event. You are in a secure department facility. You are safe. Your pregnancy is anomalous, but we are monitoring you. You are not alone." Subject B's eyes shone with something that looked like amusement. "You say that like it matters," she murmured. I clenched my jaw. "It matters to me." The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Too personal, too honest, too human. Subject B's gaze sharpened, like something behind her eyes had just noticed me properly. "You don't have children," she said. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told her that. The department had my file. The department had my medical history. The department had my age and my relationship status and the empty spaces in my life. But Subject B wasn't supposed to have access to that. She watched my face, savoring my reaction like it confirmed something she already knew. "It likes that," she whispered. "What?" I demanded. "The emptiness," she said. "The clean space. The closed loop." I felt a flash of anger so sharp it almost steadied me. "My life is not an opening for you to interpret," I snapped. Subject B tilted her head, not offended, curious, like she was watching an animal make noise. Then she said softly, "It isn't interpreting you." She looked down at her stomach again, reverent. "It's selecting." The nurse behind me inhaled sharply. I didn't turn. I didn't want to break eye contact. I didn't want to give whatever was behind Subject B's gaze a reason to think it had control of the room. "Why me?" I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended. Subject B's smile softened again. Not kind, just inevitable. "Because you're careful," she whispered, because you don't touch, because you don't reach, because you don't take up space you haven't been invited into. Her fingers flexed slightly against her abdomen as if feeling movement beneath the skin. And because you already know how to live alone, she finished. The words struck like a fist to the ribs, not because they were cruel, because they were accurate. I'd built my life around containment, around control, around keeping things at arm's length so they couldn't stain me. I'd told myself it was discipline. It was just fear with a better vocabulary. Subject B's lips moved again, silent at first, the familiar shape forming before sound. I stepped forward sharply. Don't say it. She looked up at me, and in that instant her expression changed. Not her smile, her eyes. They stopped being hers. They became still in a way no human gaze ever is. No micro movements, no searching, no hesitation. Just focus, absolute and complete. A pressure filled the room, like a door sealing. The nurse behind me whispered, "Operative, out," I ordered without turning. "Now." The nurse hesitated. Then, thankfully, she moved. The door slid shut behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. I was alone with Subject B, alone with the anomaly's work, alone with a woman whose body was becoming a closed system. I reached for the emergency sedative kit mounted on the wall. My fingers brushed the latch and stopped, because Subject B spoke, not to me, not to the room, but to the space between us, the same space between the statues, the same gap where Subject D had vanished. Her voice was barely audible, not a whisper, a confirmation. "It is already done." The lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The temperature dropped again, and my breath fogged faintly in the air. I backed up a step. My heel hit the edge of the bed frame. Subject B's stomach shifted under her palm. Not a kick, not a flutter. A roll, a deliberate turn, like something inside her was orienting toward a signal. And then she spoke again, not to the thing, to me. "You can stop fighting," she said gently. "You can stop measuring, stop naming, stop containing." Her voice softened, almost intimate. "It's so much easier when you let it happen." I stared at her, every instinct screaming, and still, somewhere behind my fear, the thought arrived like a hand on the back of my neck. Wouldn't it be easier? No more loneliness, no more empty apartment, no more quiet that pressed against my chest at night like a weight. No more watching other people's lives from the outside, a future made from one source, no one else required. My lips parted involuntarily, and I inhaled, ready. I shook my head once, hard, like I could dislodge the thought physically. "No," I said. "No." Subject B's smile faltered for the first time. Not because she was upset, because something in her didn't understand refusal. The anomaly didn't coerce. It didn't threaten. It didn't need violence. It offered inevitability, and it had never been told no by anyone who mattered. I forced my hand to move. I grabbed the sedative kit and snapped it open. Subject B watched me with calm curiosity, as if I were performing a ritual she didn't recognize. I loaded the syringe with shaking fingers. I stepped forward. Her hand stayed on her stomach. Her eyes stayed on mine. I pressed the needle into her IV port and injected. The medication flowed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Subject B's eyelids fluttered. Her smile softened. Her hand slid off her abdomen and fell to the bed. Her breathing slowed. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The pressure in the room eased slightly, like a grip loosening. I stepped back. My legs felt weak. I stared at her sleeping face, trying to convince myself this was containment, that sedation was interruption, that the department could still stop a process that had already printed one infant and erased one woman. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Secure channel. I answered without looking. Moore, I said. Rourke's voice came through, relieved. Operative Moore, we have a situation update. Anchor object retrieved. Plaque isolated. Reflection neutralized. The mayor was given a cover story. Low-level radiation contamination. I stared at Subject B's sleeping form. A thought surfaced, quiet and absolute. Had it evolved past needing an anchor at all? The sculpture had never been the anomaly. It had been the mouthpiece, the mirror, the invitation. The idea made physical long enough for the city to accept it. I looked at Subject B again. Her face was peaceful now, human, but her stomach was too still, too taut beneath the thin fabric. Something inside her had not been sedated. Something inside her was patient, waiting. I need you to listen to me, I said, voice low. Containment isn't the plaza anymore. Rourke's breathing hitched. More? It's the phrase, I said. It's the loop. It's the permission. Rourke didn't answer, maybe because he didn't want to accept it, maybe because he already had. I ended the call and stood in the quiet room with a sleeping woman and a future that didn't need mirrors anymore. I walked to the small sink in the corner and turned on the faucet. I stared at the stream until my eyes blurred. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the small mirror above the sink. My face stared back, pale, tired, eyes too sharp. A woman who made a life out of observing other people's catastrophes and calling it duty. For a moment, the reflection felt stable. The thought arrived fully formed, sliding into my mouth like it belonged there. My lips parted like I was about to answer someone. I clamped my hand over my mouth before it could become sound. I backed away from the mirror until my shoulder hit the wall. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I forced myself to breathe slowly, deliberately, like I could outpace the intrusion with oxygen and willpower. I whispered through my hand, voice shaking. Melissa Moore, 34, operative, DAAA. This is my mind. The pressure behind my eyes eased, not gone, just waiting. I lowered my hand. The room was quiet again. Subject B slept. The lights hummed. The future held its breath. I walked back to the bed and looked down at her. I could sedate her. I could restrain her. I could cut her open and remove the fetus and call it containment. The department could do all of that. And still, the anomaly would win, because the anomaly wasn't a fetus. It was a concept, a rule installed into human thought, a sentence carved into brushed steel. A mother gives life to the future. I stared at Subject B's face and felt something crack open in my chest, something that wasn't fear exactly. Grief. Not for her, for myself. For every woman in that city who would stand in front of something beautiful and be rewritten by it. For every person who would be told their body was lying and the system was right. For the quiet way the world makes room for inevitability. I turned away from the bed and opened my notebook. My hands shook as I wrote, because this wasn't a field note. It was a confession. Containment status, failed. Anchor object, removed, relocated. Vector, mimetic, identity-based. Trigger, self-reflection plus maternal line, isolation imprint. Phrase confirmation. It is already done. Risk, high. Replication event may no longer require physical anchor. Recommendation. Citywide cognitive hazard advisory, covert. Note. Subjects do not report fear. Subjects report certainty. I stared at the last line until the ink blurred. Certainty. That was the anomaly's greatest weapon. Not pain, not violence, not even pregnancy. Certainty. I closed the notebook. Then I did the only thing I could think to do that felt like resistance. I walked to the sink again, turned on the water, and splashed my face until my skin burned with cold. I avoided the mirror. I refused the reflection. And as I wiped my hands on a paper towel, the thought tried one last time to rise, smooth and calm and absolute. It is already done. I swallowed it, held it behind my teeth, refused to let it become sound, because if I said it, I didn't know what I would be agreeing to. I left the room and sealed the door behind me. In the hallway, the facility lights buzzed. A camera tracked my movement with silent precision. Somewhere down the corridor, a newborn cried, high and thin and human. I walked toward the exit without looking back. Outside, the trees moved in the wind. The sky was gray. The world looked unchanged. But I knew better now. The future didn't need to be built. It didn't need to be conceived. It didn't need anyone else. It only needed one thing. A person alone long enough to become her own beginning, and a quiet certainty that, once spoken, could never be taken back. It is already done. Department of Anomaly Analysis and Administration, Archive Entry, Pendulum Child, City Event. Status, reclassified, ongoing mimetic risk. Clearance, black umbra. Distribution, internal, need to know only. Primary author, Operative Melissa, field. Addendum type, personal statement non-standard. Date, redacted. The department didn't just remove the statue from the park. They removed it from all official records. The department called the retrieval successful. The sculpture is now contained in a warehouse facility I will not name, because names become handles and handles become access. It sits under black tarps and layered containment fields. It is surrounded by personnel trained not to look at it too long. The water feature at the park that once amplified it has been drained and filled with polymer foam, the reflective surface destroyed on purpose. The plaque has been removed and sealed separately. No one reads it aloud. No one writes it down. No one admits on record that the sentence is still there. But we all remember. A mother gives life to the future. The 4 original subjects were transferred to long-term observation under the department's maternal anomaly protocol. Subject A was moved first. She fought, screamed, and demanded her mother. Subject C stopped speaking after her mother accused her of lying over the phone. She just stared at the wall and let the accusation land and settle and become part of her. Subject B remained calm after the sedation episode, as if calm was a skill she'd been taught by something patient and hungry. Dana Lyle survived the surgery. The infant did not cry or flail when it was born. It watched. It watched like it recognized the world, had been here before, and was waiting for someone to acknowledge it properly. The pediatric team declared it viable, healthy. The department classified it as Output Entity 1 and moved it to an isolation nursery with walls thick enough to hold in sound. The department insists Output Entity 1 is viable. It is, that isn't the problem. Subject D was never recovered. The department will not write lost in an official file. We write unretrievable. We prefer notations that make disappearance sound like a controlled variable. I watched her step into the space between statues and vanish like a clean erasure. I still see it when I close my eyes. Not the act itself, the lack of reaction around it, like the future had edited her out. After the retrieval, I requested reassignment, because I knew what the anomaly had noticed in me, because I knew how easily it had found the clean edges of my life, because I knew what it preferred. Closed loops, self-sufficiency, a person who had already practiced living without anyone else. The department denied my request. Of course they did. So I stayed, and I followed procedure. I wrote reports. I attended briefings. I sat under fluorescent lights and listened to analysts argue about whether the anomaly was mimetic, ontological, or psychosomatic. I watched men with clean hands debate motherhood like it was a math problem. I watched women with wedding rings and children at home keep their faces blank and professional. I watched everyone pretend this wasn't personal, because the department survives by treating personal horror as data. But there are rules I follow now that aren't in any manual. I do not stand in front of mirrors when I'm tired. I do not stare at my own reflection in dark windows. I do not go anywhere with standing still water. I don't trust it anymore. I do not let my phone screen go black in my hand without turning it face down. I do not touch my stomach unless I am checking for pain. I do not linger in baby aisles. I do not whisper anything in public that could be mistaken for a confirmation. And when I pass a mother with her child, hand in hand, laughing, alive, I look away quickly, not because I hate it, because I'm afraid of what my mind might offer up to the future if I let myself want it. The department insists the threat is contained. They insist the sculpture was the anchor. They insist that removing it prevented further replication events in the city. And it's true that the hospital intakes stopped. It's true that the rumors died down. It's true that the plaza returned to normal. But one civilian reported phantom fetal movements after plaza exposure. Complaint logged as somatic echo. No pregnancy confirmed. And the department is observing 3 new subjects. They met original selection criteria and were observed standing in front of where the sculpture used to be, touching their stomachs and whispering. No output yet confirmed. The department has never been good at recognizing the difference between containment and concealment. The department's best lie is silence. Sometimes an anomaly doesn't spread like a contagion. Sometimes it only needs a few successful outputs to establish a new rule in the world, and then it withdraws, quietly, politely, like it has places to be. There is one final detail I have not put into any official report, because the moment I write it down, it becomes a fact that can be accessed, repeated, believed. And belief is how these things grow. But this is an archival addendum and should be complete. 2 weeks after Subject D disappeared, I was called into a secure nursery observation room to witness Output Entity 1 during a routine neurological assessment. The infant lay in a clear bassinet under soft light. It was sleeping. A department pediatric specialist stood beside me, clipboard in hand, reciting vitals like prayer. Respiration, heart rate, temperature, and reflexes, all perfect. I nodded as if any of that mattered. Then the infant's eyes opened. It didn't blink. It looked directly at me. The specialist continued speaking, oblivious. The infant's gaze held mine with impossible focus, and I felt the pressure behind my eyes return. Gentle, familiar, intimate. Recognition. The infant's mouth moved. No sound came out, but I heard it anyway. Then slowly, carefully, with the deliberation of something that understood language far better than it should, the infant smiled, and my reflection appeared in the glass of the bassinet lid, faint and distorted. For a moment, the infant's face and mine overlapped. Mother, daughter, self, self again. I stepped back so quickly my shoulder hit the wall. The specialist glanced at me, startled. Operative Moore? I didn't answer, because in that overlapping reflection, for the briefest second, I saw something I hadn't expected. Not a baby, not a monster, not a future. A vacancy, a space waiting to be filled. A clean, perfect absence shaped exactly like me, as if the world was holding room for a second Melissa Moore, and the only thing it needed from me was agreement. I left the nursery without looking back. The most terrifying part is this. If the future ever comes back for me, it won't have to force me. It will only have to wait until I am lonely enough to believe the lie it offers, that I can make something new from myself, that I can fill the emptiness, that I can become a closed loop, that I can give life to the future. It is inevitable. It is already done.